Hi, this is Paul, and Ross Byrd is with me. We just started the conversation, but if I don't start recording, then we have the chat and then it gets lost. And so I got to start. So sorry for the flow of the conversation. Ross was first mentioned to me by Jordan Hall and said, "Oh, Paul, you should talk to Ross Byrd." I thought, "Oh, yeah, I'll talk to Ross Byrd sometime." And then you wrote a really wonderful piece on marriage that I saw on Substack and that really touched me and it moved me because um marriage is I was listening to a podcast with Louise Perry and I forget who she was talking with, but might have been Nina Power, I don't know, but just talked about the fact that marriage is a difficult thing to talk about in public for real reasons. And so, anyway, so Ross, I'm sorry. We got going, and you immediately started talking. Oh no, if I don't record this, I'll miss it. So anyway, doesn't mean we have to share it. We might record this and not share it, but
No,
whatever.
that's great. That's
Um,
great. You're
well,
right. It
well,
is a very hard thing to talk about in public. It
it
took me a
is.
long time to do it.
Yeah. Well, let's start with you. And Scott, I don't know you apart that Jordan Hall said, "Oh, you should talk to Ross Bird." I don't know who Ross Bird is, but so well, let's start with the home you grew up in.
Sure. So I'm from Virginia Beach area, and I grew up with, I guess, at the beginning, sort of nominal Christian parents in the sense that they had kids and thought that we should go to church somewhere. So we went to the church that was closest to our home in our neighborhood, which was kind of just a normal mainline Episcopal church. At the time, I was born in '83, so this is probably early '90s. We started going to church, and I
Why
experienced
did your parents ever explain why they decided to go to church?
they did. I remember even then them explaining it, and we weren't super regular at first, but they just said it was a good thing to do to go to church. That was their explanation. I think that was as much as they could come up with at the time. Um, and I don't think they knew what it would do to me and then sort of to our family over the years because something about the experience of worship in particular captivated me from the time that I was, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. Maybe it was a little older when we started going, but as far back as I can remember. And so I started singing in the kids' choir, which I don't know how much that was just something that they thought would be good for me to do or something that I chose and became an acolyte and did all the sort of things that you do in a more high church environment. And each one of them sort of captivated me in a different way. I'm
Hmm.
sure that I had as little fun as any other kid who was, singing songs in Latin that you didn't understand all the time or putting on the robes as an acolyte. But something else besides the not fun part of it was also happening to me. And that's how I became a Christian, I guess you would say. I think I was baptized in the Episcopal Church before I can remember, maybe when I was 2 or 3, before my parents started going, which is very common in that world. And
Were your
so that's
parents raised Episcopal?
they were not. It was I don't know. My mom was raised in a Baptist church, and her mother was a musician and a choir director. And my father was in a kind of more a low church, like a Church of God, I think. But I'm not sure how often they went to church
Okay,
as a
okay.
kid. Though his mother was also a real believer. They both passed away
How,
not
how
long
did your
ago.
parents meet?
They were from kind of neighboring towns and they met in a bar, not in either of their towns, the way things used to happen, I guess. And one of them, my dad had to be bold enough to go say hello to my mom, and rest is history. So
What did
my
your
dad
father
went to
do for a
military
living?
school.
Okay,
he
military. Oh, military school.
went to military school and they both came from kind of blue collar worlds. He was a beer salesman, is the simplest way to put it. He and his father both worked for Anheuser-Busch, but he ended up kind of climbing the ranks in Anheuser-Busch and went to work for corporate in Florida for a couple years when I was very young. And then thankfully got a job with a distributorship that moved him back to Virginia Beach, where he was from and where I grew up. And then after a few years, that didn't work out, and he became kind of a unemployed entrepreneur, which ended up working out way better for him than I'm sure he could have imagined at the time. I think it was very unpleasant for him, but he did very well starting a business with a friend after that. And we became sort of wealthier as I got into maybe high school or so, which fit better in the Episcopal Church because
Yeah, well,
everybody else there was pretty wealthy.
it's so funny because in sort of the American hierarchy of churches, so you're born 83, so your parents probably just a little older than me. I just turned 61.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the mainline era in American history, of course, Episcopalians, they were the top of the hierarchy. Presidents became
Right.
Episcopalian. Beneath them, you had the Presbyterians, and then Methodists, and then Baptists were sort of all over, but that tended to be the hierarchy on the American WASP uh, pecking order. And I'm really curious because I don't know what kind of place is Virginia Beach, because a lot of places on the East Coast can have beach in their name, but people that might not, is it what kind of a town is Virginia Beach?
It is a beach town, at least the part of it that's closer to the ocean front. So
Okay.
there's a kind of beach culture there, and that's where I grew up. And it's more affluent, as you get closer to the coast, which is pretty typical in almost any town. Um, it's also a very big town. It's a military town, so the
Uh,
Norfolk, Virginia Navy base is, huge. I think it's the largest base, at least on the East Coast. And so that's a very definitive part of the culture of Virginia Beach. It's somewhat transient for that reason. And it's kind of like a mixture of a bunch of different sprawling suburbs that don't fit well into each other. They tried to create a downtown, quote unquote, a number of years ago, and it didn't exactly become a downtown because it's just too much space. I mean, half of Virginia Beach is still farmland to this day because it's so big. But it's sort of a spreading. Even that farmland is being taken over by more suburban developments, and so yeah, that. And then in terms of church, it's a pretty low church culture. It's a lot of non-denom successful mini mega churches or legitimate mega churches. There was a culture of mainline churches like the one that I went to, but most of them are dead or dying, with a few notable exceptions, including the Episcopal Church that I grew up in,
hmm.
which is still flourishing. So
What do
Pat
you think?
Robertson is a Virginia Beachian.
Oh,
Um,
really? Oh,
so
interesting.
his family were actually pretty um, significant in my faith journey. Not him, but his one of his sons was
Huh.
a vestry member at our church, and kind of they sort of took me under their wing. And so our church was a really cool mixture of almost every Christian culture you could imagine. It had a very Pentecostal sort of ethos, and also an evangelical sort of revival when I was in middle school or so. When I first started going, like I said, it was sort of your typical traditional mainline. And it went through this series of sort of revivals as I grew up in it. It was almost perfect timing for me. So I could sort of take in these different experiences of Christian expression, but all in one place with one family. So it was very, I consider
Wow.
myself pretty fortunate in that way, though it also had plenty of problems, as churches often do.
That's a pretty amazing thing because, of course, when I think Pat Robertson, I do not think Episcopalian. And
No, and he was not.
and so then, well, do you know why, what about you or what about it sort of captured your imagination? Because again, that's not typical.
No, it's not. In fact, even in my town, none of my friends have that story. Most of them, even if they went to church with me growing up, that wasn't how they would say they quote met the Lord. It
Yeah,
was through a some kind of ministry like Young Life, which is
yeah.
really big in this area. Um, most of I would say my peers, and even quite a number of my peers' parents, for example, my wife's parents, did become Christians through Young Life,
Yeah,
and through other ministries like that were not even really connected to the church, and thus
yeah.
the sort of low church environment that Virginia Beach is. But for me, so this is a kind of an odd story, but I think part of it was music. I'm a musician, and I think I mentioned my grandmother kind of had that in the blood before me, and the music was just excellent, as it often is in Episcopal churches. And so you grow up with Bach on the organ and stained glass windows to accent that, and a flower guild that's always done their job. And again, it's not like as a 8-year old or a 10-year old, I'm really appreciating all this, but it sort of seeped into me. And by the time I was an acolyte and carrying a cross down the center aisle and helping with the elements of the Eucharist, helping the priest, giving him the water to mix with the wine or whatever it may be, all of that, I think you could say it produced a kind of fear of God, and awe, maybe in the older sense of the word fear, and awe. And I loved that, even though, and I believed it. I believed in God, even though it wasn't what you would call like an evangelical experience until maybe I was 14 or 15 when our church went through that sort of revival. So it was kind of later in my upbringing that someone was like, Jesus can be your personal Lord and Savior. Not super late, right? I was probably 14, but and that was great too. But it never replaced for me that initial awe. So I remember asking my parents very specific questions about the Book of Common Prayer. Why do we say this confession every week? Why do we know before we come that we're going to say the confession again? It's one of the questions I asked my dad, confessing what we've done and what we've left undone and all of that. And he was like, I don't really know. I mean, now my dad is a really deep Christian. At the time we had fun conversations together because we were sort of figuring out together in sort of the childhood of our faith at the same time. And my mother as well. So yeah, I don't know why I was curious. I think God just loves me.
Yeah. You're just sort of an OG metagelical. I mean, just right from the start, you've got the evangelical and the main line, and they just sort of came together in that church. Now, it's not uncommon for, say, someone in upper elementary or even junior high years to sort of, I mean, between sixth and seventh, eighth grade, people are sort of developmentally naturally dogmatic. But then, of course, once you get into those differentiation years as a teenager, things get complicated. Did you sort of stay a church kid throughout high school, or what was that like for you?
I did and didn't, because my family, I mean, yes, I guess you would say I did. It maybe wasn't the typical church kid because we still weren't really a typical church family. We were just kind of like a somewhat normal secular family trying to be upwardly mobile. And I went to a private school and played sports and did all those kinds of things. So most of my sort of cultural, one thing I don't have in common with maybe a lot of my evangelical friends is that I didn't listen to Christian, CCM music or whatever, as a kid or any of those things, because it was still an Episcopal church, right? It's still kind of like, but those elements of a kind of more evangelical expression built slowly in me in a way that I think was really, really healthy. Though, like I said, again, I mean, our church struggled in all kinds of ways. My youth minister was caught up in a sex abuse scandal when I was 18. Oh man! With the victim being one of my best friends, my wife's best friend, and he's in prison now because of that. And so there was those kinds of things as well, which tore my community apart, as you could imagine. And then also when I actually went back to work as a lay minister in that church when I was in my early 20s, kind of right out of college. And that was when the Episcopal Church was going through the throes of, they had just ordained a gay bishop, and our church was pretty thoroughly Orthodox at that point. But it was an odd time for us to go through that because the vestry at the time, kind of the lay leadership who called a lot of the shots, as is often the case in an Episcopal church, were at that point kind of fully evangelical and didn't have a lot of ties to the tradition of the church like they would have if it had happened maybe 10 years before that. And so their response was, well, we're just leaving. Like we don't really have any legacy in this place. We don't feel the weight of needing to keep the building, let's say, which is a long haul, and legally and otherwise. And so all 12 of them said, we're just going to go elsewhere and start a new church. And that's what happened, and it was a really extreme event. And it was my first year on staff. I think every ministry staff person or clergy person stepped down within that year or the next, except for me. And I actually stayed because it was, for me, like I said, it was just kind of like already in my blood. Where else was I going to go? I was doing youth ministry at the time. And so the next 2 years after that, the diocese just put someone in charge because all the clergy and ministry staff left. And it was more like your normal diocese party man who was questionable, let's say, whether or not he believed in the virgin birth or the physical resurrection. And so I got a taste of that old liberal mainline approach for a couple of years again, which was very odd after growing up in the iterations that I did. Though he was a good leader in many ways. And so I learned from him as well. But thankfully, the church has kind of regrounded itself with a new priest who's been there for years now. And it's built up again, but it was a weird and scary moment. So that's just a couple examples of other things that we went through.
Wow. So college, what did you do in college? And it sounds like you continued to go to church in college and your faith continued to grow in college as well.
I did. When I first got to college, I was curious to see other expressions of the faith. So my first year, I went to a charismatic community church and really loved it. And yeah, I think it changed me in some ways, though it also, I guess, in another sense, didn't really feel like home or didn't feel continuous with what I had experienced and probably would continue to if I wanted to do ministry, which I was beginning to think about once I was in college. Just the vocation of ordination, being called to ministry, and so then I went to a Reformed PCA church. There's a large PCA church. I went to University of Virginia, so probably the longest standing church there is a PCA church for a little while, and then I just ended up being hired actually by a priest who had moved to town in the Episcopal church to come be the musician for an Episcopal church for my last 2 years of college. And so it was actually just through a coincidental him reaching out to me and asking about that and me needing a job. I feel bad to say that I ended up back in the Episcopal church, and that ended up being kind of the most shaping for me. And so I stayed there after college and began the ordination process that they call it the discernment process to be ordained in the Episcopal church. This church in Charlottesville was also one of very few, let's say, evangelical leaning Episcopal churches. They would maybe call themselves Orthodox, not evangelical. They might not like that term as much as my church in Virginia Beach, but anyway, it was cool to have stumbled upon two churches like that in my tradition when there aren't very many these days. And so that was very shaping for me. That was where I had my greatest mentorship that I probably ever had, a guy named Paul Walker, who's still the rector there. And in the end, I discerned that there was just not that much of a future road for me to be ordained in the Episcopal church. So I didn't include the ordination process, though they helped me quite a bit and paid my way through seminary at Reformed Theological Seminary, and I was already kind of a weirdo there too, because it wasn't exactly a place for Episcopalians. And so anyway, That's kind of just been my whole story. It's been a mix of many traditions, but mostly always shipwrecking back on the Anglican tradition.
So what did you study in college?
I studied business for the first 2 years. Both my parents are business people, salespeople to be specific. And that was their wish for me. They were paying for my tuition. And I realized at the end of the second year, I had to ask for their permission to not keep doing that because it was making me miserable. And it's ironic because now I run a business like they do. But that, anyway, that's how God works. But the second 2 years, I studied religion, great religion department at University of Virginia, maybe more on a secular level. And then also I double majored in East Asian studies. Oddly enough, I had a random opportunity to go to China when I was 18, and it captivated me in a similar way, actually, maybe to what I was describing about my childhood in the high church environment, where I I think I am sort of a philosophical soul. And when I saw people of China thinking about the world in upside down ways from the way that I thought about it, I needed to know more. So those, I ended up living in Beijing for part of, I withdrew from college and lived there for a little while so I could learn the language and learned it pretty well, got pretty good at it. And most importantly, learned to love totally different kind of people and a totally different way of looking at everything that there is. And so that still affects me to this day. I actually tried to start a business a few years ago that would give me an excuse, just sort of a side business to keep traveling back there. And it did give me the excuse to travel there a few times, but in the end, it wasn't viable to keep doing it. But it's still a strong part of my consciousness, people of China.
How did you find RTS?
That's a great question. I loved it. I still don't think there would have been a better place for me to go at the time, but it was weird for me. Coming out of UVA and a kind of Episcopal and evangelical background, I thought like I was, I'm a Reformation Christian, and the church in Charlottesville that I was kind of trained in right before going to seminary was quite Lutheran. Episcopalians are weird, especially the ones that are not kind of predictably liberal. Some of them are like hyper reformed. Some of my kind of current was almost like a pretty staunch neo Lutheran approach. I don't know if you're familiar with Gerhard Forde or Paul Zoll. David Zoll is a friend of mine who does Mockingbird Ministries, which you might have run into. They have a pretty big presence on.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's that kind of sort of Lutheran law gospel approach to things. And so anyway, I went into RTS thinking, well, I like Calvin too. So I'm sure the reformedness of this will just kind of play well with everything I already believe. And I guess I should mention, I haven't mentioned this yet. Lewis is really my mentor. That's sort of who I discovered when I was, maybe 10 years old. That young one of the priests in my church said, "Here, read this." I think it was Mere Christianity first. And almost from that day forward, I just thought, this is my father, basically. I mean, my father is also my father, right, thankfully, but in another way, he really has been. And in a way, I've tried to kind of, not because I think he's right about everything or, that he's the Bible or anything like that, but I have tried to, in a way, kind of participate in his mind in the way that I try to navigate whatever current problems there are or whatever. And I think it's been very helpful to me overall. He's an amazing thinker and writer. So anyway, maybe I went in with that ethos more than any other. And I didn't realize how confessional RTS was. And so my first paper who happened to be the dean of the school, this was in DC, the chapter that I was studying at, I wrote a paper for in systematic theology that was taking issue with one of the lines of the Westminster Confession, and I made an argument against. I mean, this is my first, like, his introduction to me, and this guy was in charge of the school and was teaching this class, and I thought I was just doing the same thing I would have done in any other environment that I'd been a part of. And he dang near failed me. He told me after this paper, he said, "This should disqualify you from ministry and perhaps worse." Like I wrote that on my paper, and he gave me a C-. I remember this very well because I worked very hard on the paper. And he said, "I don't give D's. And the only reason I didn't give it an F is because this is my first experience with you, and I'd like to give you another chance." But what he didn't end up doing was really, he operated with he's an amazing man, by the way. He's passed away now, but and he was a great teacher. And I was very obviously naive coming in, and I wouldn't have written that paper, though I still probably agree with the paper, but I wouldn't have written it, coming in. And so from that point on, he made my experience there not as easy. I was taking a lot of my classes at UVA because I was living in Charlottesville and commuting to DC, but they were allowing this really liberal transfer of credits, which after that moment, they were not allowing. and so I had to commute more. And Oh gosh, it was just the whole thing. And I'm still very grateful for it. I ended up demoting my degree from an MDiv to just the academic portion of that. I don't
Yeah,
remember what they called it, master's in theology.
yeah,
Um, Partially because I didn't think he would stamp me for approval, and the MDiv
yeah,
was a stamp.
yeah.
And I ended up being okay with that because I wasn't going to be ordained in the Episcopal Church, and I wasn't going to be ordained in the PCA and, or the Presbyterian side of things. So I just thought, okay, well, I still want to learn this stuff, and I still feel like I'm called to ministry. So here we are. And it was great. And all of my professors were excellent. It's such a rigorous, the Reformed tradition, as you obviously know, is so rigorous. My initial plan was to go to Duke. That's kind of where Episcopal clergy tend to go. But I was cocky enough to think that I would get this full ride scholarship because I had really good grades at UVA and didn't get it. I wasn't Methodist, which usually helps. And so this was education fully covered, and I think it was better than the one that I would have paid for. So.
Hmm. Hmm. When did you
Sorry
get
for
your
the long answer.
No, no, I like long answers. You should know that. I like long answers. Where did you meet your wife?
We grew up in the same town.
Wow.
She came from more of a charismatic background, church wise, like more of Assemblies of God when she was younger. And then as our church, the Episcopal church that I went to, started going through changes, her family actually came to Galilee, which is the name of the church that I grew up in when we were in middle school. I actually remember the first day I saw her was in
Wow.
church when we were both in the 8th or 9th grade. And I looked at her and I said to myself, I really did, I want to marry someone who looks like that, which is not a very profound thought, except that
It's
it
not
that it
that
happened. So that makes it
uncommon.
more
It's
profound.
not uncommon. It's amazingly not uncommon for people to. I remember the first time I saw my wife. I remember it very vividly. And that's if you go back and you like read a lot of marriage books, it's not an uncommon thing to see someone who's like bang.
Oh
And
yeah, it was a kind of love at first sight, like a muse struck by the arrow. So having having had that experience, I proceeded to not talk to her for 4 or 5 years, which was kind of cool in a way. We had some very shared experiences that we did not share the experience of. In other words, we have pictures of ourselves going on a mission trip together when we were in the 9th and 10th and 11th grade to different places in Central America. And we were both there, with a group of, let's say, 18 people, and we're both in the picture, but I didn't really talk to her. And so we have these, and I was partially because I was just very intimidated by her. She's tall and beautiful, and I didn't know what to do with girls. And so I was pretty timid in most ways as a kid. And so, and again, I don't know, it paid off okay in the end. So
so
I
what turned the
don't regret it too
corner?
much. When we were in college, we went to colleges that were not too far, not the same college, but maybe 45 minutes apart. She went to James Madison University. We had a wedding for a mutual friend of ours that I probably shouldn't have been invited to. She was a bridesmaid, but somehow it was just God's will that I would be there. But I didn't RSVP to it because I was a 20-year-old and 20-year-olds don't RSVP. And so I showed up and it was a sit down dinner with like no place for me to sit. Like I'm not on the roster, for the thing. And so she ended up pulling up a chair next to her for me to sit and, have dinner. And then we danced together and ended up staying up till 4 a.m, standing out in the parking lot, just talking till 4 a.m. after that night. And so that was kind of the game changer
That's
for
a
me.
great
So,
story. That's a great story.
yeah.
That's awesome. So,
So we got
um,
married right out of college. That was 2 years into college. We got married
okay,
when we were 22.
okay.
And, yeah.
So well, it sounds like you did she do something after college too, or did she go to work, or when did children start coming, or how did that
So
go?
I kind of mentioned this in the marriage piece that you wrote me about, but we got married. I was pursuing pretty seriously, at least trying to be in church ministry, like as a lay minister. I was doing homeless ministry at the time. For the Episcopal Church, they allowed me to kind of invent this position because it was kind of funny because they had like the Episcopal Church, maybe the not as well, I don't know a good way to put it, but basically it was a homeless problem, which I think you're very familiar with. It's actually one of the things that first drew me to you was just that was such a regular part of your story. But they would just always have people showing up at the door. It was a downtown
Sure.
church,
Yeah.
and and whatever
Yeah.
lady was volunteering at the
Yeah.
front desk just didn't know what to do with it. It was
Yeah.
scary, and sometimes the
Yeah.
people were drunk or high or both.
Yeah.
And so I sort of proposed. I was already a musician for the church, but that was sort of part time. So I said, "Hey, can we make it full time if you make me the guy that makes this into a ministry that roughly you would say deals with these people?" But
Hmm.
in my mind was like, I want to get to know them. I want to know what this mysterious corner of our town is, which was mostly in the woods nearby the downtown area of Charlottesville. So I spent a lot of time in the woods. So I was doing that when we first got married, and it was not actually conducive to our marriage. It was it was not at all, really. I'm sure it might have been for two different personalities, but I was so thrown into it, and
Mm.
my wife was so um, in, sort of intimidated by it. Couldn't
Yeah.
share it with me, which was one of the themes of
Yeah.
the piece that I wrote,
Yeah.
and it required weird hours, people
Yeah.
dying, me being in an ER with somebody.
Yeah.
Um, it was just not well. I guess it's all good because it's what God is in charge, but it wasn't
Yeah.
sustainably good for us long
Yeah.
term. And so, after my second year doing that, um, we decided to make a transition back to our hometown church, where I became the youth minister there. And at the same time as this, we started this surfing camp in the Outer Banks, which was sort of just a whim. I like to just do random whim things, and that was one of them. But it just happened to be the one that stuck, and so we both
Mm.
enjoyed this one little summer that we got to spend in between church jobs,
Hmm.
inventing pretty much this overnight surfing camp, and it worked just well enough that we didn't lose our friends' money that
Hmm.
invested in it because we didn't have any money, and um, and so that became a kind of ongoing theme that whenever however my relationship with the church was, I would always say, "Can you just let me not be there for June, July, and August so we can continue this weird project we have of being in the Outer Banks of North Carolina?" It's like a 2 hour drive from Virginia Beach, and it's the best waves on the East Coast.
Mm.
And it's a kind of dirt road, uh, off the beaten path kind of area. It's beautiful. And and it was up my wife's alley in every way possible. She
Mm.
just loved every bit of that compared to the church ministry, the early church ministry
Mm.
experiences
Mm.
in our marriage. And so over time, I kind of noted, okay, this is a place where we really are partners. And the church ministry,
Mm.
which I feel way more strongly about and called to, we
Yeah.
haven't figured out how to be partners in that yet. And so, yeah.
Boy, that is a massive, massive thing. So as you might know, I'm third generation minister, and
Yes.
figuring out ministerial marriages. Boy, so one of the really important pastors of this church before I got here, he actually was retired and back around when I came here. I mean, he and his wife, they were sort of the quintessential ministry team. She played the piano, tremendous pianist. He was a vocalist. He was the preacher. They had five girls they raised in the house that, I
Mm.
currently live in. But it's figuring out the relationship between ministry and marriage is it is a big deal, and probably very few sort of, like with many things in life, you find what's livable, and maybe if you find an ideal, and if the marriage is going to be able to survive, I mean, it's got to be somewhere in there. And of course, ministry can be so all-encompassing, especially if you're doing something like with homeless. Um, that was a thing for my father. My father's rhythm was he was in the study every morning. He was um, calling in the afternoon, and he was doing meetings at night. So, you know, every day, and of course Sunday was church morning and evening. And I mean, that's an all-encompassing thing. So,
Heck yeah.
That's a big deal. I want to
Is
finish sort of getting the picture here, but so eventually you don't wind up in professional ministry, you wind up in business,
right.
and your wife.
With a lot of um let's say marginal ministry work through all that time. The business that we run is seasonal, and so it's kind of allowed
Oh,
us to stay in ministry, but in less orthodox ways, in just other avenues.
well, talk to me about that life balance because that's really interesting. Some might argue that you've managed to pull off a bivocational ministry lifestyle then.
That's pretty much what it is. Um, so over time, I became an associate pastor in a church that was kind of the height of my pursuing ministry, but it was in a non-denominational church because I decided not to seek ordination in the Episcopal Church, and that role sort of ran out in a sense. It was partially it was me hitting a wall in the non-denominational space, where I became almost accidentally trying to make it not what it was.
Hmm.
I was the associate, but it began to introduce tension with the pastor, who was very low church, who really didn't even want it to be an institution with elders or anything like, he just sort of was like, I'm here to minister to people, and like as little institution as possible would be
Stay
great.
out of the way.
Exactly. But he wasn't straightforward enough, and I don't blame him for this. To say stay out of the way, I would kind of
Yeah.
propose like, what if we did this? And he would always be like, yeah, that's fine. And I didn't take his shoulder shrug to mean you should not do that, because I was still too naive to understand those kinds of relationship dynamics, and
Well,
so
part of it's
it
his
just
fault too. I mean, a
it's,
pastor
it
should learn
was it
how to
was a
say no if he means
it
no.
was it was immaturity on both of our parts, and so in the end that path just sort of soured, and like I was
Mm,
saying, it was already hard because it wasn't the place where our marriage had found partnership. It was always
mm,
compromise.
yeah.
And and so I sort of knew when both the, let's say, professional or vocational side of it and the marriage side of it had always been hard, that it was just time
Mm,
to be done with that. And at that point, it had already been a few years where the surf camp was paying all of our bills. It was already kind of just it had been very successful. And so I wasn't doing it for, you know, money for sure. Not that I ever was, or that any minister ever is. But um, but anyway, it allowed us to just step down and be like, we don't know what we're doing next, but
yeah.
we just have to step down. It was extremely painful for me because I felt responsibility for every single person
Mm,
in that church for years, even after I stepped down, because of the relationships that I had with them, which continued. We were still in the same town. They still saw me um, as a kind of spiritual authority in their lives, even though I was young, my early 30s. Um, but and to this day, that has kind of lingered. So I'm sort of more like I've refused to ever take a official ministry role again. I learned something from that.
mm,
But I've been a pastor on the margins, I guess you would say, ever since. And so a couple years after that, I was sort of roped into by my friends, becoming the co-director of a fellows program. I don't know if you're familiar with these, but it's kind of like a post undergraduate um, apprenticeship leadership program for kids getting out of college.
mhm,
You help set them up with a job, and then
mhm,
usually there's one day a week of theological training. What are you doing with your life? How to think about life Christianly and family and work. And so that was about 7 years ago. I said that I would not direct it. We had, thankfully, a great friend of mine who I knew from UVA that we hired to direct it, and I sort of inadvertently got roped into joining him, because he was smart and the board was smart, and I have still to this day, even though it was sort of against my will at first, become the teaching director for it. So I've kind of slowly taken step backs from the being a part of the whole nonprofit organization. But every Friday I show up and I teach for a long time to 16 22 to 24-year-olds, and just get to teach my own curriculum, introducing the Christian life for a whole year every year. So that's one part of what I do. And then there's other less official things.
So it sounds like, I mean, you still have the surf camp.
Yeah. So the surf camp is, I guess you'd say, how we make a living, but it's
Well, tell
only
me
three
about
months out of the
that.
year.
Tell me about that search camp, that surf camp. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So I started it with one of my best friends who is Jewish and kind of a secular Jew who has also been like a spiritual brother to me all along. He's a believer of sorts, though not a Christian, and not really a good Jew either, I guess you would say. But I say that to say that from the beginning, there was not really a question of it being like a Christian surf camp. It was
Yeah.
just, we grew up surfing together and
Yeah.
we wanted to make a good surfing experience, like the ones that we were given driving down to Hatteras, sleeping in our cars at night, in this area that I was talking about before with dirt roads and that sort of thing. And so that's what we made. He had a bit more funds than I did. And so he leaned on me, and he had a good job. And so he sort of leaned on me to design it, and he was going to help fund it. And then we got to do it together for a year. And then it became the sort of thing that wasn't sustainable for us to do together. So I bought him out, and we continued to run it the way that we designed it, which was just to be kind of a surf camp. That it's a high end camp. Kids come from all over the country and the world. Even you pick them up at the airport and drive them. It's 2.5 hours even from the airport. So drive them down and give them a week at a time, just experiencing this beautiful place. It's home cooked meals. It's like in a house, family style, sit around one table. And so, yeah, it still is that to this day. I mean, since then, I've developed it for myself to be a Christian ministry,
Yeah.
though it's not outwardly so, I guess you would say. So for my staff, even the staff that I hire, many of them are believers because that's the kind of network, let's say, that we draw from a lot of times, but many of them aren't. A lot of them are campers that came and they just experienced something that they loved and they said, I want to come and work and be a part of this. And so that's when I have to break it to them that this whole time it's been this secret Christian operation, which I say it's kind of great. Like, there's kids who come from, the Northeast, have never darkened the door of a church before. And I say, look, the camp is still everything that you thought it was, but I do actually run the staff like a Christian community. And you don't have to be a Christian, but I also don't water it down. So you have to imagine, like if you were going to Iran or something like that, you'd expect a different cultural experience. You wouldn't be like, why are these people forcing their religion on me? So I won't be forcing it on you, but it's just going to be a different cultural experience. And I just want you to join it and just feel comfortable, when we pray, just being there with us or doing whatever we do. So I lead Bible studies. We pray for the kids every morning. It's become, over the years, though it wasn't quite at first, a pretty serious discipleship program for, the 20-somethings that we hire. And they've become some of our best friends. And they grow up to, because now we've been doing it for so long, this will be our 20th summer, to have families and kids of their own. Sometimes they marry each other. And many of them become Christians, just working with us in the summers, and some of them don't, and that's fine too. But anyway, so in the long run, it has just become a somewhat straightforward Christian ministry, but also not at all straightforward. So that's surf camp. One cool thing I guess I'll add is that because I was talking to Jordan Hall about this sort of thing, which you might have seen, is that the cool thing about the tradition of summer camps in the U.S. is that it's this place where you can still basically create and rule your own village with its own culture that is completely set apart from everything around it. And that's probably been, I think, the coolest thing that's kept us doing it through the years is you have these kids for a week and, we take away their cell phones and they're just stuck at the breakfast, lunch, and dinner table with us. And then fearful moments in the ocean where they didn't know what they were getting themselves into when they signed up for surf camp, because the ocean's pretty scary. And so they go from, I don't know, the somewhat intimidating having to be face to face with other human beings for a whole week, asking them, about their lives and asking us about ours, and then sharing, these experiences in the ocean with us. And by the time they go home, they're just so wide-eyed and shocked that life could look like that for a week. That they, I mean, most of the time they say it's the best week I've ever had in my life. Um, and part of it, I think, is due to just being able to create this microcosm, which is very hard to do given our technologies, but also just given the shape life even before those new technologies. So that's a cool thing about summer camps.
Wow. This is so you sort of graduate from being it's a youth pastor and then associate pastor, and you just create this really cool. People don't sign up for sort of Christian boot camp with surfboards, but you sort of made it. Um,
Right. Exactly.
that's really cool. That's really, really
And for
cool.
the campers, again, there's no Christian
No,
content.
I
It's
get it.
not a bait and switch. It's just,
No, I get it.
yeah, yeah.
But it's okay, it's surf boot camp done by Christians instead of drill sergeants. But
It is
you're
boot camp for the staff, that's for sure. It
but
really is that.
it's so
It's a
cool
hard job.
because again, you're sort of eliminating some of the distractions. There's a focus on something, so this isn't, let's say, unlike certain Christian camps where the focus is going to be on Jesus, but we're going to have volleyball and swimming and boating on the side. The
Right.
focus is on, you're going to have to navigate this. So I don't live by the coast, unlike what many people believe around the world. California, while it has an enormously long coast, is not
Yes,
itself
yes.
a coast. And
A
even though my
coast.
my youngest son, shoot, maybe I should send him out by you. He might really like that.
You should.
He learned surfing a bit. He was going to UC Santa Cruz. That's where he went during college, and so he and a buddy played around with surfing a bit. But that's a really, really cool thing you've got going there. And I can understand how that's so interesting because there winds up being in, let's say, the Christian ecosystem, a certain segment of people like yourself who are vocationally devoted to Christ and but you're not working for a church or working for a parachurch, but you're clearly vocationally devoted to Christ. But I get the sense that you've sort of have a really nice balance of we are Christians, we're unapologetically so. We have this little thing that we run, and we run it in alignment with our value as Christians. You can sort of come into here and never pray and never be a Christian, and those expectations aren't on you. But in terms of the communal expectations while you're here, these are the communal expectations for us, so that you can leave here hopefully with a little bit of competence with respect to surfing, but also in a bigger way. Because I don't know if you caught at the Northwest estuary that we had in Olympia, Washington, Karen Wong sort of broke something open when she said she was talking to someone, and they were saying, what is it when you start to learn something well enough that you realize that there's no bottom to it?
Right.
And she was mentioning,
Exactly. That's
somebody
good.
somebody talked to her and they're like paint. And everybody's like, paint, it's the thing with color walls. No, no, no. If you really learn paint, you realize there's no bottom to paint or hair. And again, you think, well, hair. And no, but if you really
Yes.
learn hair, there's no bottom to it. And I could very easily see that you get to a certain level with surfing that, oh, there's no bottom to because it's a very, it's, it's an it's a very it's a very transjective thing. Surfing, you've
Yes,
got
it
a
is.
board, you've got the ocean, I mean, and you've got the beach, and it's just the combination of all of these
Fully
things.
participatory.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. That is
Yeah.
super cool.
It
Huh.
makes for the kind of like parable or metaphor that you never have to talk about. Because
Yeah.
once you do it, you've already, I think about how Jesus taught in parables, but he also acted in parables, right? Like
Yes.
he almost everything he does is a parable too. they're just parables that he didn't have to talk about, or that he
Yes.
just acted instead. And surfing is a bit like that. I mean, everything in life is, right, if you have eyes to see it.
But at the same time, I mean, there's something. So my youngest just turned 25, but in some ways, I think partly because COVID sort of scrambled a bunch of things. He's the youngest of five, and I've watched all of my children sort of have to navigate this because, in a sense, when you've got him in school, that's sort of here's a program not set by you. Here's a body of information not set by you. Yeah, you're going to have to learn some things about a whole bunch of things in college. College is already sort of getting a little swampy in terms of water, land. But then when you're done
Definitely.
with college and you want to make a transition, let's say, into a work environment, a career environment, they all have jobs sort of left over from, but they want to sort of launch into a career. That's a really formative time in life because you are now really increasingly separating from your parents. Your parents really probably in many cases can't do a lot for you. Like in my son's case, oh, here's a bedroom and there'll be food and the internet is here and but I'm not in a profession where you can daddy doesn't give you a job because Livingstone's is a mega church.
Right.
Not happening.
Right.
So, and I can really see you then as a mentor, both with this fellows program, and I mean, it sounds like you've just sort of found a vocational niche where all of those issues are very salient in a variety of different ways. Would that be fair?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The fellows in the surf camper have a decent amount of overlap because it's both employing 20 somethings.
Mm.
Our camp itself is, I guess I didn't even mention this, but it's for 12 to 18-year-olds. So it's kind of like
Oh,
the product itself is for teenagers, for
yes.
middle school and high schoolers. Um, and then, you know, both for campers, but especially for, let's say, staffers and for the fellows that come through my world. A lot of them end up living in Virginia Beach in the area that we live in, and
Yeah.
overlapping with us for years to come. Some of them are in their 30s now and have kids and go to church
Yeah.
with us, and
Yeah.
um, and so it is itself, both of those things that I guess I spend my time doing, like you said, are at a critical time for people when they're trying to figure out their lives, and we get to be right there with them as they do, and then we get to watch them grow a lot of times um, alongside us. So some of them are in our homes still on a weekly basis. They're like some of our best friends.
That is so cool. It's not a religion that's not a religion. It's sort of a church that's not a church. Um,
Yes, and I've struggled with that quite a lot,
yeah,
quite a
and
lot.
and you're oh boy. Yeah, I can really see that. Well, how on earth did you find me and this whole crazy thing that you're now, I gotta warn you, your face shows up on my channel. Certain people take that as liberties to invite you or beg you into things. So
I would be more than happy for anyone to invite me into things. I think I've known you since near the beginning
oh,
of you getting online. I was very similarly interested in Jordan Peterson for the same reasons you were at the same time. And you were like the main guy in town that was a Christian that was talking about it. And it's funny looking back. I mean, I'm sure this is all obvious to you, but I was in a oh gosh, I don't even know what to call it. This thing called Philosophy Portal last night. A guy named Cadell invited
yep,
me and Christian Baxter to
yep,
join him, and he was talking about the Jordan Peterson thing. He's been talking a lot about you, actually. I think you've really shaped the way he's thinking about Christianity as a not as someone who's a straightforward Christian, and it was cool to see how you have shaped him. But anyway, he was talking last night about how Jordan Peterson is sort of, I guess, like straightforwardly a representative of Christianity, and from his perspective at least.
yeah,
And so I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about you, kind of in the early days. That it's funny how Jordan Peterson was not really talking straightforwardly about Christianity in the beginning. You had to really navigate. I mean, that's what you were doing in a sense, and that's what I was doing in the same way. I think I got attached to him because he seemed like an early Lewis to me.
Yeah.
he seemed like someone who was, in a very similar way, if you kind of read Lewis's story, was stumbling upon a bunch of other truths, even if they're through Hegel or some other place in modern philosophy. For Lewis, it wasn't as much modern philosophy, though Hegelianism may have been a part of it, but that ended up making him a Christian. And when I heard Jordan Peterson speaking early on, I thought, oh, that's just what's happening to him. It's happening. And what's funny is that it kind of has happened. It hasn't happened, let's say, straightforwardly so, but now it's like you can't listen to the guy talk without him talking about Jesus and the Bible pretty much every single time. And that it's, I mean, maybe it's obvious, but it's not at all. It's just good to remember that that wasn't his center of his locus of communication in 2018 or whatever. Though it was compelling, and in some way, another interesting parallel he has with Lewis is he has this weird way of being kind of hyper modernist, but also like growing out of it at the same time, because he's like a scientist. And I think early Lewis was sort of like this too. And maybe you can see how the Inklings begin to, like Barfield, especially maybe, and Tolkien in his own way, almost talking him out of it and talking him into a more fluid or analogous way, maybe a symbolic world way of understanding reality, which is why I ended up really resonating with Peugeot in a lot of ways too, because of his overlaps with Lewis in ways that are a bit harder to see, but were easy for me to see, I guess, just from how much I had invested in him. So anyway, when you started talking about, sorry for the tangent, but when you started talking about Jordan Peterson, I was very interested to hear another Christian talk about it. And then I just really enjoyed hearing about your life and your way of thinking about all kinds of things and all the community that you've built. I'm not heavily online, and so I'm not like a good fan. I'm a big fan. I'm just not a good fan. It's like I go to UVA, and that's our thing too. We're big fans when we're doing well, but we're not good fans. We give up on our team immediately after that. So, so anyway, I think that's why. Yeah. So I'm not consuming a lot online, but I've really enjoyed.
That's not a sin. It's not a sin to not be terminally online. I mean, there's some of us that are a lot, but it's not a sin to not be. That's certainly not the case.
And yeah, it's understandable because I've seen the community that you've been able to build, and even physical communities that are being built out of that. It's been really inspiring to me, and so I've stuck with you all along for sure, anonymously. So I'm sort of a lurker. But yeah, that's my familiarity. And I guess I just want to say, because this is good a time as any, Paul, I think you just represent the faith so well. And it's been really inspiring to watch you do what you do for this time, just as an onlooker who hasn't known you in all this time.
Thank you. That means a lot. It's a weird thing. I didn't set out in 2017 to do this or be this or whatever I've done. And but yeah, it's been an interesting ride. Now you're playing around with Substack.
Yeah, the last year I've been more online because I decided about a year ago to start writing publicly. I've just written for a really long time because I've been teaching a lot. That was always kind of maybe my most gifted part of ministry life. And then after ministry life, like I said, I became teaching director for this program. And so always been writing. I think it maybe comes from music. My main drive as a musician was always to create, not so much to like imitate, and which makes me a bad musician in terms of musicianship, but still a pretty good creator, songwriter or whatever. And so when I guess I sort of discovered writing as an art, which is kind of later in life, it's sort of fully converted me. Like I haven't even written a song in a few years, which is sad to think about, but it was like all that energy. And when the surf camp became our main source of income, it freed me up to, I mentioned this in the article, but to help homeschool my kids. And one other thing that it has done was it freed me up to sort of create artistically. And so I wrote a novel. That was like my first, once I realized when I'd stepped down from the church, and I wasn't picking up another job, because I'd always, we had lived a really quite frenetic life because we were running this full-time business in the summers, and it was like the day that it ended, you're back into full-time ministry, the next day. And then you go full-fledged, full-time ministry until the day that it starts again. And so I'm
Oh,
doing it late at night or whatever. When I was doing seminary, it was like I'm doing all three of those things at the same time, going to bed at 4 a.m. or whatever. And so I just, finally, I guess you would say my lifestyle matured to some degree where it
yeah,
was like, oh, I have some margin. And
yeah.
writing began to fill that margin. And like I mentioned, I wrote a novel which will never see the light of day, because it was, it's like you have to do something first, and then you
Don't
realize,
tempt the internet, Frodo. Someone will find it and put it
right,
on
right.
Bridges of Meaning Discord.
Maybe one day I'll come back to it. But it was a cool kind of first experience, and I found this amazing, um, extremely grumpy, um, retired literature professor or creative writing professor who just like adopted me. He was running a workshop just to make some extra money at night. He was pushing 90, and so grumpy. And I mean, every time I wrote something for him, it was it was like every single page had more red on it than the black ink of the words that I had written.
Wow.
Never, but then every once in a while, he'd reach a line in the, whatever I was writing, and he'd be like, "That's okay." And then I just have this feeling inside like, "Oh, I've done what I needed to do," because he gave me a half compliment. And so over time, he sort of adopted me, and we sort of took the relationship, offline, off of the
Yeah.
workshop or whatever that he was
Yeah.
writing. And he stuck with me for a few years, and I kind of just learned how to write, as a sort of like you're beginning to play piano or guitar or something like that. And I still think
Yeah.
I'm, a B- writer, but I think I'm an A level thinker, and I'm trying to marry those two things.
Yeah.
And so the last year or so, to your question about Substack, I decided, okay, well, I'll try to write in a more public facing way, and that'll be a new challenge. Mostly selfish, kind of like you talk about your video
Yeah.
making.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't think I have some profound thing to offer the world, but you learn a lot when you can create and other people can give you feedback or whatever. And Substack's been just a great platform for that. It's how I met Jordan Hall. It's how I met all kinds of great people just over the last year. Random people contacted me because they liked something that I wrote. Um, and so, yeah, that's Substack. I don't know
It's
where it's going,
yeah, no,
but
I totally get that because writing has been disrupted. The publishing industry is tremendously disrupted. Um, Magazines, newspapers, many of the writing, before social media, we didn't really think about platforms. But of course, newspapers were platforms, magazines were platforms, book publishing, those were platforms. All of that has been disrupted by the internet. Substack is interesting in that um, Substack is sort of brought writing, at least essays, back, given it a space again. But, the writing vocation is, well, it's enough artistry so that most people will starve. Um,
totally.
and and you know what video and YouTube has sort of brought out. So I was playing around with writing before, but not terribly seriously as a writer. It was just sort of everything for me was sort of something that could help me in my ministerial vocation and also in terms of my self-leadership. Bill Hybels used to put out these tapes with the Willow Creek Association.
Mhm.
And I remember one of the tapes, I probably only listened to a tenth of the tapes that came by. And then we got one, and it was on the art of self-leadership. And I don't know if it was a tape or a CD or what it was by that point, but I started listening to it. And Bill Hybels said something to the effect of, a pastor should spend 75% of his time on self-leadership. And I heard that and I thought, are you out of your mind?
Yeah,
That sounds
seriously.
absolutely insane. But, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much sermon preparation, how much all of the normal things that you do in the course of ministry is sort of self-leadership. How when you visit someone, you're certainly there for the person you're there to visit, but there's so much that goes on in between
Hmm.
that my ability to connect with them has a lot to do with who I am and who I am going down. And so,
So true.
writing is this weird thing that we do. And now we're in a position that I would guess that some awful percentage of writing that is done in the world will never actually be it will never actually get a lot of serious attention,
Yeah, I think
which
it's
is
true.
which
Treasure
is
in
sort
heaven.
of normal with life because the vast majority of what we do in the world does not get serious attention from anyone. And those
Exactly.
concentric circles probably begin in the home with the family, with the marriage, and then children, and then sort of out from there. And thinking about where you've sort of landed vocationally, a lot of your vocation is, in fact, sort of that space.
Yes, for sure. Writing has the way that I even started writing publicly was I thought, okay, well, I just want my audience to be my community. And I've stuck with that rule that the people I'm writing to are the 200 or so people that I'm connected to in my community. I mean, even maybe you saw it today, but I put out the Bible reading plan for this month, and so every month, I'm it probably seems very foreign to however many other hundreds of people are getting my email, but for our community, there's a lot of people that I don't know count on me for that small thing each month to tell them what we're reading in the Bible this month, so we can have some common um, uh, spiritual practice with each other, and so that will always kind of be my main goal is to write for the community that I'm a part of, and in a sense, like you were getting at, I guess to sort of write for myself and as a reflection of what God is, what I'm trying to figure out for the sake of His glory and for the sake of others. And once you write about something, you have to go through such a painful process of not knowing what to say and then not knowing how to say it. And how to say it is like somehow twice as important as what to say anyway. And you really experience that in writing. This is one of the deepest convictions I have about Christ's teaching is that I think he was more interested in how someone could possibly hear him than it is in what he was saying. Like if you see the parable of the sower, as the problem is not the seed. The seed is so simple. The problem is the soil. And so then the question becomes not how do we disseminate the seed, but how do you till the soil so that people can receive the seed? The word has always been simple. It's always been like a seed, and it's always been plentiful. There's plenty of it to throw around. He can throw it on every single type of ground. Uh, the problem, the complicated part, is the human heart that won't receive that very simple word. And like if you think about how do you tell your uncle that he's an alcoholic or something like that? Well, you can say it in 3 words, but that doesn't mean that he has the ears to hear it. And so then the problem becomes not so much like, well, you can lead the horse to water, but not make him drink. But how could you make the horse drink and not make him drink? Um, but become some kind of muse in his life that makes him want, well, I guess I'm mixing analogies here because makes him want to not drink in the case of the alcoholic. Um, so that's the way that I see writing is some kind of fellowship with Christ in that place, because to me that's what the whole gospels are in a sense. Is why does he not come and just say the thing with a megaphone at first, right at the beginning? Well, it's because he has a communicative strategy. He hides in order to reveal. He lets things come in their right time, in their right way. And it's just at the right time. You think if the cross had happened one day sooner, maybe they would have been too broken by it to ever recover. But it happens in a way that perfectly breaks them, but that they're just ready enough at that moment that they wouldn't have been a few chapters before to say like, all right, I'm broken by this, but maybe I can also share in the resurrection that comes when it comes. And then you see the restoration of Peter, and even halfway through the book of Acts, he's still needing to be restored in new ways and shown new things. But God is so patient to incrementally communicate things. And so that's what I think. I'm sure you think the same way with your sermons, but that's what I think of is like be patient to incrementally communicate things. And then that starts with you. It's like you're the one with the soil that needs to be tilled first. And so writing is part of the tilling of my heart, and hopefully a way that I can till other people's.
Oh, that's really good. And it strikes me your so this April plan, and I'll put links to your Substack below. This April Bible reading plan. Um, who is the primary audience, and there's probably an audience that you don't see.
There
So,
probably is. The primary audience is my actual physical community. So, like I said, Virginia Beach is a is a series of low church, non-denominational evangelicals. With some exceptions to that, but largely my community is an evangelical community of people who go to a particular church but don't all go to the same church. And there's a bit of that consumerism in there where it's like, well, I prefer this style of preaching or this music, and yet our what I would call my community, who go to 5 or 6 different churches, is still one community in a strange way, that the people we're doing life with, that our kids are playing with, that we even homeschool together or whatever. And so over time, I've become a kind of pastor on the margins, as I say, where I'm just sort of one of those people that helps to unify and to lead. I don't know a better way to put it. People spiritually, and I've tried very hard to get less and less official about it, because that comes down to real sacraments. People asking you to baptize their children because none of the non-denominational churches baptize infants, and to do their marriages and to do their funerals. And for a few years, I did quite a bit of that. And I've tried to really pare it down, because I don't think it's sustainable for me to be a kind of sacramental center. Well, I know it's not. And that has been difficult because, like I said, sometimes the centering of our community is not actually in the church, is not actually in the people go to a church on Sunday morning, but churches are not. I've written quite a lot about this, but we're in a season where, let's say, it hasn't been an effective way of making church. It sort of makes a Sunday morning, but not a church. And so I have longer term goals and thoughts about how to help our community revive into, let's say, neighborhood level actual church. But in the short term, I myself go to a non-denominational megachurch that is maybe not what I would prefer in any number of ways, and yet it's my church. It's where I am, and so yeah.
well, it really strikes me that there's a deep commonality in terms of what we're both doing,
Mm.
because I mean, the question, one of the questions that I'm thinking about a lot is the how the internet the role of the internet in terms of the Christian life, and how it disrupts, intersects with, replaces with, can never replace the local church and denominations, um and so what we're seeing are all these other little stratas of networks and communities that have leaders and pastors and it's I think it's a mystery to us, because like you said, and I think that the parable of the soils is a great image of that, because sort of via Substack or YouTube, seed just goes out
Right.
and you have no idea where it's going or what it's doing.
Exactly. The internet is a perfect image of that problem, of the problem of
Yeah,
the seed in the soil.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
infinite seed, but falling in all kinds of places. You have no idea how it will be effectual. And probably it can only be effectual with some kind of local tilling.
yeah,
Though also I think you can till through the internet, which is what you're doing. I
yeah,
mean, I think that so there is some overlap there. And
yeah,
so I imagine you probably see in that I sent out today, that I'm not just writing for my physical community. I'm trying to be inclusive of, I don't know, the 1,000 or so people that are subscribed to my Substack, and say, hey, join us in doing this thing. And it really has been a beautiful thing. We started a few years ago, just trying to unite a number of, maybe a couple hundred people in our community under a similar reading plan, where even if you
yeah,
don't see them all week or in a couple of weeks, it's like you then talk about some problem that's going on when you do see them, and then you relate it to the fact that you were just reading this same chapter in First Kings, and
Yeah.
there's an immediate connection, even though you haven't seen each other in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
because you've shared this practice. And so I've been aiming for those kinds, some similar practices in prayer and finding spiritual authority. There's like 5 main practices that I have suggested that our loose community come around, and it's had some fruit. I don't think it's been amazingly fruitful, but you got to start somewhere. So
Yeah.
start with baby
Yeah.
steps.
Well, and you can't see, I mean, there was no need to apologize for, I mean, people always, I haven't seen all your videos. It's like, there's a lot of videos out there.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not my
Especially for you. I mean,
expectation.
you're like the most prolific man on the internet. So
I'm not sure that's a compliment.
it is a compliment.
But
It's amazing.
again, the article, I'd read some of your things and I've sort of been following you on Substack, but the article that really grabbed me was the marriage article. And I know we're about to do something that's probably ill-advised because you have 2 married men who are about to talk about their marriages without their wives. And my wife will probably not watch this because she doesn't watch anything I do. And when people ask her, don't you watch your husband's video? And she looks at them like, why would I? Why would
I
I
think
watch?
the piece I wrote on marriage was the first one that my wife has read from beginning to end. So,
Yes.
it's because I made her. I was like, "This is about you. I'm not going to publish this without you reading the entire thing from beginning to end." So,
Wise man. But I think in some ways the not in no way in an identical way, but the internet marriage is a hell of a thing. It really is. And it's something that, I've had the marriage crisis, a series of conversations on my channel about marriage with some a couple of psychologists who are married to each other, and then Rod Hare, another, long-term member of the corner. And then again, that I really have to dig up that Louise Perry. I really have to clip that section where I don't even remember who she was talking with, but they at that moment I saw sort of the, if you could call us online influencers, which is really cringy, but that's sort of what we're left with. Um, and then having to deal, because the thing is about marriage that you've got this dynamic of there are many things about a marriage that cannot be publicly disclosed for the sake of the marriage, for the sake of the children, for the sake of your spouse. There is by definition, a privateness to marriage that must be maintained and respected. That's
Mhm.
absolutely key of marriage. And what that means is that veil creates, distorts the the public image of marriage to the rest of the world,
Yes.
where either marriage is something that there's got to be boilerplate, um, good things to be said about because you're trying to respect and honor your spouse and your marriage and your children and your family because those are of immense value. And then when let's say a divorce happens, then suddenly then what do you say?
Right.
Because everything in the middle, which is where most people's marriages are, and
Right.
usually all over the middle. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they're there, sometimes they're there. And partly because I think, as your story indicates, as most people's stories indicate, all of the particularities of your life have impacted this partnership. And
Yes.
you
Super
have
complex.
it's super complex. You have to keep the marriage together financially. You've got to eat. And then when children come along, those stakes are higher. So there's a financial aspect, there's an emotional aspect. And of course, both people bring to that marriage all of their complexities as individuals. And so to actually write not just about marriage in general, which is a little bit easier, but the problem with writing about marriage in general is the same problem about writing with everything in general, which is like you can write about surfing. What's that
Yeah.
really going to do for you?
Yeah. What good does that do?
And
I
I
think it's a good
think,
metaphor.
yeah, and I think your
Yeah.
piece, you know, it was noteworthy in that you were able to get into that middle area where it's really hard to communicate publicly about it for hosts of important reasons, and you were able to give people, both who are married and of course are thinking about their own marriage, and those who are thinking about the institution or maybe living together or in a relationship or situationship or maybe in the rubbles of a marriage or maybe the rubble of their parents' marriage.
Mhm.
And that is a remarkably difficult thing to do. And I thought you did it really well. And so I really wanted to
Thanks.
thank you for that and note that because I think it's also a tremendously important thing that it be done now while there's so much rubble about in the culture with respect to marriage that many
Yeah.
people are just basically saying, I'm not gonna go there. And I understand why.
Totally. Totally.
So let me ask you this, to the degree that you can, how did that article come about?
It came about pretty naturally. I have this rule with my writing that I really like to do exploratory writing, which is kind of
Mm,
like what you're doing a lot on your channel, but it
yeah.
never works. And so my rule is only really like write and publish the things. Maybe this will change over time, right? But I feel like have really been tested in my
Mm.
life that I can say with confidence, kind of like you wouldn't give a sermon exploratorily, or something like that. You would usually say like,
Yeah, it's
you probably
true.
would.
It's true. The sermons are a little bit more towards the harder end than the rest of the videos.
Oh man,
True. But
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
thinking, how much do
Sorry,
I
I'm sorry.
explore
I'm
in
talking
those
to the wrong.
sermons? I'm not sure
You're,
Living Stones has been well served. So I'm sorry, go on.
no, no, I'm not saying this as a rule. Anyway, um, I my maybe probably why I relate with you so well is all I ever want to do is think exploratorily. However,
Mm,
if for my own life and because I'm very young, I have to just be like, okay, I'm only going to really seriously publish things that I have some degree of confidence about. And so that piece was one of those that was very easy to write because over the last however many years of people asking us, how do you do marriage? That's the one that we keep stumbling upon, and it probably started exploratorily because I don't know, nobody knows how to answer that question. When someone asks you, oh, well, how does your marriage work? Like what worked and what didn't or whatever. And partnership over compromise is is this sort of 3 word summary of the thing that's worked best for us to share.
yeah.
And and it's just true. There's so much of marriage is compromise until it's partnership, or else just forever compromise in a way that's quite painful because
Yeah.
you're just not on the same page about
Yeah.
expectations and desires and realities that you do not share because you are two completely different people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the institution of marriage will, in a beautiful way, will try to convince you that the two become one when they become married. And of course, it is true. And so it's convincing you to a truth, but it's also often leaving out the other half of that truth. The already not yet. It's leaving out the not yet, which is that, man, you just did something. You just tied a knot with someone that is a knot. It's in more than one way. And so anyway, that's how I came to write it. It was a bit more of a challenge to personalize it. I knew that I had to personalize it to us for the reasons that you said, that I had to hit the middle ground, that I couldn't just like write something abstractly about marriage, that nobody would care, or if they did, it wouldn't be all that helpful. I think I mentioned in there, people follow people, not principles, right?
Yes.
And that's one of your great attributes, I think, is that people really see the person in you. You're not just spouting out principles about the Christian life. And so that was unpleasant to realize. Oh my gosh, I have to share about our actual marriage, and so I did it in the best way that I could. And you're teetering on the line of if I share too much of the negative, then it's dishonoring to my wife, to my marriage. But if I share it too much in a way that makes it seem like, look how it worked for us, then it's sort of like, oh, look at us. You should just try to imitate us. So I mentioned at the end of it for anybody who actually makes it that far, because the piece is too long, um, that I'm not saying it in order to make people try to imitate us. Even if we tried to go back and imitate ourselves, it wouldn't work. That's just not the way life works. God's providence leads you through any number of traps that you might have fallen into and you don't know why. And the way you tell the story in the end makes it sound like you did have some kind of 2020 vision in retrospect, but you don't when it's happening to you. So, but what I do know through all that is forging partnership out of compromise has transformed the way we see our marriage, and it's transformed our marriage. And it's not nearly as easy for people that haven't fallen into, let's say, some of the things that we've fallen into, having two careers at the same time. It's just going to be so much compromise. And we don't exactly have that. We have a business that we can run together, which is really cool. We homeschool our kids together, which is really cool. And so I'm not saying that everybody can do what we did. But also we had to make some hard decisions that that's the way we wanted to do it, and turn down other opportunities to do so. And I'm so glad that we did, even though I'm quite an ambitious person. I think in my nature, I realized somewhere along the way that I needed to be ambitious for my home, first, and then let whatever falls fall. You know.
Yeah, no, beautifully put. And again, kudos to pulling that off. And it's and you were very honest with this in the piece too. I mean, it'll be an ongoing story. You're in a stage
Oh yeah,
now, and
it
yeah,
is that.
and those children will continue to grow, and they will. And so no,
We have a
it's
16-year-old right now that is, um, she's kind of like, we joke that she's our sinless child. She's just like, she's our oldest. She's just so wonderful and so helpful. She's like another mom to our other kids. She's everything that you would want a kid
yeah,
to be.
yeah,
But as a 16-year-old, she's like, really finding this kind of independent. It's not this sort of rebellious kind of independence, but
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it is a painful kind of independence for Hannah and I,
yeah,
where we're just
yeah,
really struggling. Like probably maybe one of the greatest, parenting struggles that we've had. I guess we've been doing parenting for 16 years because she's our oldest. Um, and it's been great. I mean, it's been really, Hannah would not say that it's great right now, but those very struggles end up, being a kind of, chemistry that makes something new and beautiful
yeah,
out of them. But it's
yeah,
always testing, like you said. It's
yeah.
testing.
And unlike surfing, when it comes to parenting and marriage and the rest of life, we don't only get to go out on the nice days. I mean, you're on the
Exactly.
water. You're always on that water, whether it's too calm and you're like, it's like this surfing sucks. We
Boring.
can't,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
or it's like nobody would go out there. Well,
Yes, we're still going out.
you're still going
Surf
out.
camp is like that. Maybe surf camp is like that. It's like,
Mm,
maybe a surfer who's not in a surf camp could say, I'm not going out today. It sucks. But when you only are given 6 days to give kids a good time, it's like, well, we're going to make the most of today, even though it's, stormy and not very fun looking. And life is very much like that. You've got to make of it every day. There's no
yeah,
days you don't get to be married and have kids
yeah.
once you're married and have kids.
Yeah. Well, you've been very patient with me with my pestering questions. I want to give some time to you. If there's anything you want to ask or pursue or anything like that, it's yours.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I am just curious, for you, and you can forgive me. I don't want this to make you make boring content because you might have answered this, um, elsewhere recently, but just
Yeah,
where
because everybody watches all my videos, so if I
right,
answered
right.
it on the
Okay, good
internet,
point. Good point.
I don't have to say it again.
My question for you is, because I do see a parallel in what you're doing and what my interests are, though maybe we're pursuing them in slightly different ways. Um, just where you see things, gosh, I'm trying to make this not a really generic question, but where you see the project that you started a few years ago on the internet going now, like in this moment, are you like, yes, I want to continue to move in the direction that we're moving? And I guess my question is specifically as it relates to church or how you understand the body of Christ.
Well, part of it is, of course, local, and Living Stones is just always sort of, teetering on the edge. Um, Recently, I realized um, we hadn't had any bookkeeping reports for a few months, and so I asked my deacons about that, and they're like, "Oh, I think she's missing a statement, so she can't." And then it's like, well, do you know if there's any money in the bank? That was if
Be
I,
good to know.
because if I go to the bank and the check bounces, that'll mean something for me. So can you check on that for me? And we have next week Sunday, we have three adult baptisms of men over 50 and two professions of faith, which are people who have been previously baptized, but they're joining the church. So in a church our size, we have five new members, which is like this crazy percentage. I mean, we're the fastest growing church in Sacramento by percentage. I'm sure of it. Now
By
there's some
percentage, very impressive.
I'd say there's some church out there with 10 people and they've gained five new members. They'll say, ah, yeah, where you got nothing like us. So, in
Do you
terms
get
of,
people who come in off the street because of your videos? Like, do you get, or people that actually become members that way?
well, so really, it's really the three men who are being baptized. One, Rick came the Sunday after I made my first video.
Huh.
Uh, Chemo and Charles J sort of came in from the Freddie and Paul show. So for those of you out there in the evangelical world looking for a surefire church growth strategy, what you really have to do is study the Freddie and Paul show, because you will
Yes.
learn all of my tricks of my explosive church growth in North America. Send your donations to livingstonecrc.com/give, and there you go. You can have my mega church evangelism project called the Freddie and Paul Show. So yes, three
Pretty
fifths of
cool.
it
That's
is
pretty
pretty cool.
cool. Yeah.
Although Charles was already Freddie's friend, and I already knew Charles, but I didn't know that
Yeah.
Charles hadn't been baptized. And so yeah, so it did three-fifths of those people did come because of Videoland. But
Sorry, I threw you off from the main question.
well, that never happens. I'm a very straight shooter. I once I get on something, I don't get distracted. Um, it's an I am constantly thinking about what church is, the shape of the church,
Yeah.
how church disciples. I'm always thinking about those issues, and so that's why your Substack is interesting in terms of what is a church. And I am not someone who says a church is anything that you want it to be. No, I don't think that's true. I think, I'm still a Calvinist, and that, preaching of the word, proper administration of the sacraments, and the discipline, but also communion of the saints. Um, I'm still also an Apostles' Creed Christian. So
Yes. Yes.
I see those things too. And I didn't I didn't set out to do what I did. And so I don't necessarily have a lot of expectations about where it is that this will go. I would love to see more churches start to play with estuary on a regular basis. And I think, even on a weekly basis, partly because I have tried a tremendous number of things in, gosh, how long? I've been at Living Stones, not quite 30 years. And I've been in ministry getting up there now. And what I've seen in my every week estuary group at Living Stones has been really magical. And
Mm.
I, just in terms of dealing with a lot of sort of the structural issues that I see church having.
Yeah.
We're not giving up the Sunday morning worship service with sacraments and preaching and all of those things. That's not going away. But and the estuary group is in no danger of swamping it or outgrowing it by this point. That's not the case either. But
Mm.
when I look at the quality of the interaction and the quality of the community and the and how sort of the church unchurched line is being transcended, I think, wow, I I really wish even more of my own church members, even more of my council members, I'm still leaning on to them to get in at 9 o'clock, and a lot of them are like 9 o'clock. We had a couple last week come in from another CRC church down further in the valley. They thought church started at 9:30, so I rooked them into estuary, and they had a wonderful time.
Huh.
But I
So that's when you do it before
before
the
church on Sunday morning, which means
genius.
it's
That's a good idea.
diehards.
Yeah.
And it's and again, so, some of the people don't stay for church.
Yeah.
Some of the people do stay for church, but even the people that don't go to church anywhere and they don't stay for church, they don't miss estuary. They come every
Yeah.
week because it's that important to them.
It's
And
the narthex,
it
it's the
is.
yeah, that's good.
And I I look at the value that is there, and it isn't for everyone. There's no one size fits all, just like there isn't with surfing or marriage. But that doesn't mean that there isn't also structure and patterns and rules and physics. Those things are there too.
Yeah.
But the world is just that complex. So I really do want to encourage people to, if not estuary, but just make sure. And it sounds to me like in many ways your surf camp is really awesome in that you've got this really interesting estuary type boundary water of there are Christians here who are serious about their faith, but they're not lording it over other
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
But you still have, if you're at all curious about what the Christian life is, take a look, ask a
Yeah.
question. And Estuary managed to do that for me, and the internet had managed to do that for me in a way that nothing else had before.
Yeah.
So, so many of the videos I make are just, I need to talk something through, and I don't have a staff. And, you
Mm.
know, my wife gets enough of me wanting to talk through things. And she's,
So does mine. That was an early marriage lesson I could probably write an article on too.
that's
Don't
right.
talk your wife's head off.
No. And so many of, especially the initial Jordan Peterson meetup phase was those who were married came in and said, I found Jordan Peterson on the internet. And wow, there's so many cool ideas. And I tried to talk my wife about it. She looked at me like, I don't want to talk to you about this. So then where else can I go? So then they found the Jordan Peterson meetup and the TLC and all those things. So I
Yeah.
don't really know where all this goes, which is
Yeah.
I'm totally okay with. I'm just thrilled about so much of the fruit that I've seen.
Oh,
And
it's so
so
cool.
I'm just going to keep doing what I do.
Yeah, you should.
And now
That's
with the part that we're kind of doing it today, I still think a lot about the Randos conversation and that phase and how that fit in. And so in some
mhm.
ways, I'm trying to move towards, as you well know, in church, you start a church plant, it's the pastor, it's often with a church planter, it's really companionship and marriage. But then you hit a certain number and you sort of have to have different strategies to give people what they want. And it's also not just a question of scale, it's also in terms of the development of the people. So a lot of
Mhm.
the people that started, really in the TLC online space, they're in a very different place than they were 8 years ago or 6 years ago or 5 years ago. And so you still
Yeah.
do want something for the people who are coming in now, and you still want those to be small things. They can't have a
Yes.
relationship with 1,000 people. There should
Yes.
be a little, tidal pool in that estuary where they have 4 or 5 really good friends where they just can't stop talking about whatever it is that they're all chewing on. But it's really good if that is connected with other little tidal pools and new waves are coming in. And so what sort of developed is an ecosystem.
Hmm.
And what's cool is there are way, way, way more people like yourself who have seen a few videos or a few dozen videos, but have seen something to sort of continue to keep an eye on it than the
Oh yeah.
Chads or the McMoes or the Sams who watch a lot. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think about that ecosystem and I do sort of quietly, strategically try to modulate some things in there while at the same time also continuing to use it for my own self therapy that I use it for. So,
Do you find yourself being very often self-conscious about let's say a growing jargon that you've developed over the course of the years that you've been doing it, where if somebody watches you for the first time, they'll be like, I have no idea what he's talking about? Or do you just kind of say like, well, I've got some introductory videos here. You can learn the way and, catch up with me as you can.
no, I am self-conscious about it. It's a frustrating piece, but as many have noted, it's almost an unavoidable thing. In fact, one of the videos that I thought about doing yesterday, maybe still do, is there's someone on Substack who's just sort of, you know, saying mean things about my friend Jonathan Peugeot, and I'm going to set him
Yeah,
straight.
I just read a couple of those articles and
Yeah.
I was frustrated by them. So
And,
you should do that.
well, what I actually want to do is, to the best that I can, what I've sort of always done is try and help make what I think is the brilliance and gift that Peugeot is to the wider world a little bit more accessible because
Oh,
I
totally.
understand why people read him and are like, oh, this symbolism, you can do that
Just
with anything.
it's just word salad or or
Yeah,
it's just a kind of arbitrary symbolism.
yeah,
Totally. And it's funny because I was speaking of myself as like a grade A thinker, but a B minus writer. Peugeot is like an A plus 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 thinker and maybe not an A communicator. Like
right.
which is interesting that he's had, I mean, thankfully, maybe it's through his relationship with Jordan Peterson. He's had a kind of I don't know, bump up because of that. I'm so grateful for it because I don't know that there's anybody currently living that maybe has affected my thinking as much as he has. A lot of dead people, but living people are hard
Yeah,
to come by
yeah.
that really like change the way you think about things.
And I sort of got started in this space by trying to make, I mean, it's a classic pastor's vocation, try to make Peterson and a little bit more accessible and Vervaeke a little bit more accessible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there's, and it's been funny watching, Cadell Last's writing about me. I was reading it and thinking, boy, this is actually really helpful
Yeah. Yeah.
because I've got my own, and now we've got all this jargon about, and it's really helpful to have someone come around and say, okay, Vanderklay says this, and this is my take on it. I'm going to try and put it into language. And it's
And were
like,
you like, I didn't mean to say that? Or
no,
did you feel
actually,
like
I
you
found what he wrote quite helpful. And
good?
so then
Yeah.
it was like, I
Yeah.
got to make sure more people read this because I can also be hard to understand. But
Yeah.
there is this dynamic of, unless there's an inside to it, it's not going to be a thing. And
I
so
completely agree.
you've always got that dynamic of we know who's deep in it because they're going to say metagelical or they're going to say remember embody.
Yeah.
So you're signaling to your tribe. Everybody needs a tribe, but and again, for me, that's why estuary is super helpful because people come into an estuary. The funniest thing was one Sunday, some guy comes in because of meetup.com. He has no idea. So I said, tell me some of your story. He looks at me like, tell me some of your story. So
Yeah.
who are you to be asking me personal questions? Like, oh, okay. All right. So, yeah, well, we're just feeling our way through this whole thing. We really are. But yeah, that
Yeah.
language thing is an issue, and we certainly haven't solved it in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't say that as a critique. I agree that there needs to be an inside. I think that's almost a built-in problem of anything that's in touch with reality is that there's going to be a kind of jargon that you form that really is getting at reality, and that those who aren't able to see that reality in that way are going to have to struggle with it seeming like a foreign language to them until they take a step further inside through trust. And hopefully, what you're saying is trustworthy, and that meeting of trust and trustworthiness makes for a deeper, lasting relationship. But that's always going to take time. If everything you're saying is immediately accessible, it's
Yeah.
probably not worth listening to. So I
I'm
think
I,
that's
I'm really happy that, with what Cadell is doing and a few others, I'm really happy that we're seeing some penetration of writing from the TLC, that
yeah.
some of that is getting in because at this point, Jordan Peterson's books, someone else needs to write Jordan Peterson's
Yeah.
books for
Right.
him.
Right. Right. I
Um,
agree.
and to a certain degree, Jonathan too. Now, Jonathan,
Do
I
you see he's
remember,
got this new class?
yeah, yeah.
That'll be
But I think
interesting.
you're right in that it's, as is so often the case, Jonathan is going to need others around him who can explain Jonathan to the world for Jonathan.
Yes.
And that doesn't take anything away from Jonathan. And again, part of what I see is, even though in some ways I'm supposed to be someone who translates things into for broader audiences, I too need people around me to translate me to broader audiences.
Yeah. It's like a
And
fractal pattern.
that's right. And there's something about the divide between, let's say, the video thing that we're doing and writing. Writing is different. And, I don't know that I can adequately explain all the differences, but I do know in my experience that if I, it was really smart for Jordan Peterson to write a mega bestseller,
Mhm.
because writing will give you entree into audiences and levels of society that YouTube never will.
Mhm.
And so I think if some of what we are discovering and learning and working on is going to get out into the world, there are going to need to be writers that add to that layer. Transcripts are not going to do it.
Mhm. Very, very interesting. Yeah, what you can say in a piece of writing that's short enough that someone will actually sit down and read it is filtered in a different way than a YouTube conversation or even a YouTube sort of monologue. And that filtering matters, and it communicates differently. And not everybody can do it. It's very, very hard to filter
Yeah.
things well. And maybe even some of the highest class thinkers need help with it.
And because the platforms, the writing platforms are disrupted, I think we're going to have to see, just like so many of the other elements of our society have been disrupted, government, church, education, the writing platforms have been so critically disrupted in many different ways.
Mhm.
In some ways, they're going to have to be rebuilt. And that hasn't happened for thousands of years.
Interesting.
Because books, of course, you had scrolls, and then you had, sort of the book. And of course, the Bible is the book. That's what the Bible means, the
Hmm.
book.
Hmm.
And then, of course, the printing press comes around. And and so there's been a fluidity since the printing press. But then the internet takes text, and now text can be married to video, and we see that like on YouTube or Instagram where you've got the text underneath the audio.
Hmm.
Um, and and so I really think that over the next, I don't know how many years, we're going to watch us try to get to recreate the replatforming of writing. And so, as you well know, okay, how long will people read something? Is it TLDR? Um,
Yeah.
how many words? I mean, you're dealing with that every day now.
Yeah, totally. It's a weird world because I'm not a good enough writer to write short. And so I just had to accept that in my, maybe similar to you, um, don't be perfectionistic. If I try to do something that I can't do, which is write short, it'll just take me too long to write any one thing. And so if I want to write more than one thing in my life, I have to write it long. Long as in hopefully like a 15-minute read as opposed to a 5-minute read, and just accept that 15-minute reads are going to go out to the people that want to read things for 15 minutes, which interestingly, I think is mostly women, at least from what I can tell on Substack. I don't think a lot of men, in my experience, um, will read 15-minute reads. Like literally read. They'd listen to a podcast for, a couple hours.
Yeah,
But and I'm similar. I literally don't. Now that we're talking about it, I guess I should say I do not read that long. The only reason I can read anything on Substack is because of the AI audio that can keep me locked in for a 15-minute read by listening to
oh,
the transcribed audio. But I don't have the patience to read either. I'm just not a very good reader.
interesting. Well, and part of it is, so now you and your wife are with your partnership, your homeschooling, you have your business.
Mhm.
Reading is in many ways, a function of leisure.
Exactly. That's
While,
part of what I'm getting at. Yeah.
yeah, while
Yeah.
listening for many of us, I can drive and listen, I
On
can
the
do
go,
chores and
doing the
listen.
dishes. Yep.
But as you know, that's also a different kind of listening too. And so we're at a point right now where so much of these things that are tying us all together, it's all being disrupted. And so I don't know. I hope, people are often asking me, well, when are you going to write a book? Am I too ADHD to write a book? Maybe.
That'd
But
be a good book.
what's that?
It'd be a good book.
Well, thank you. But it probably has to wait until retirement because, a video thing and church, well, I've sort of been able to make that combination work. At least
Mhm.
it's probably true that Living Stones would be closed if it had not been for the YouTube channel. We
That's
would
cool.
not have made it out of COVID. I'm
Yeah.
sure of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, I don't know, but I like experimental places and Substack. I find myself now, Substack has become a pretty big part of my morning routine or an evening routine. When I do have eyes that don't have to be devoted to some task, Substack
Yeah.
is is something that I can scan quickly and get, you know, those things. But I think about you, I think about Ethan Cahy, who's just new in the corner, who's a writer, and now he's playing around with Substack. I really do think that we're going to have to re-platform text, and I don't know that any of us knows what those re-platformings will look like because books aren't going away,
Right.
but what will books be? There was recently, I don't know if you caught it on Substack, there was recently someone who had written some really insightful things about John Mark Comer's writing style.
Yeah.
Did
Oh
you catch
yeah. That
that?
was well, I thought you were going to talk about Griffin Gooch's article. So I got to help like peer review. But I know which one you're talking about. That was super interesting. It was who was it that wrote that? It was a great take. It was kind of like super short paragraphs, get across sort of the medium as the message sort of thing. Different kind of message than, gosh, who was that wrote that? Samuel James, maybe?
Yes, yeah. But it was super insightful because,
It
and to
was.
me, that was in that issue
It's what you're
of
talking about.
disruption. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. His
And
communication style is a bit disruptive. It's like
yes,
it's almost YouTube-y.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
And I think about Lewis, who, gosh, what a writer. But
yeah,
what a writer of certain things because again, his
Oh yeah.
fiction, it's not bad, but I mean, and whereas Tolkien sort of, you know,
Mhm.
did something, and that's why everybody's writing is also individual and it's not disconnected from the person and so on and so forth.
Even Lewis's nonfiction is, it's super long paragraphs. Sometimes you can't fully, it's always logical because he has such a gifted linear way of thinking, but you can tell it's always one shot. He just said everything he wanted to say and then sent it off and went to the next thing. And it's kind of cursed me as a writer because his writing is always in my consciousness and it's not exactly a great style to imitate, right? Like
Yeah.
it is. I do think he has a great style, actually, and a lot of people don't. So I guess it's a hot take in a sense. Um, but again, it's as somebody who's trying to write in this milieu, it's a curse to have that as the style of writing that is always living in my mind. It
Yeah.
doesn't help me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
especially with his authority versus mine. Sometimes like Jordan Peterson can get up on a stage and kind of trip through some words, and you'll still be hanging on every word, but if you're a nobody on the internet, you better get to the point.
Or stay a nobody, which
Or
isn't a
stay a
bad
nobody,
thing.
which is actually a great thing. Fame might be the new translation of the verse Jesus says, it's hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. I feel like if he was talking now, he'd probably say it's hard for the famous. That's the currency of our moment, is to be seen.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like that. So, I don't know where I'll have the links to your Substack. So you're
Yeah,
Substacking, you're
called Patient
homeschooling,
Kingdom.
you're doing the Patient Kingdom, you're homeschooling, you've got your surf academy or your surf camp.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any, you said you're ambitious. What are your ambitions?
None anymore that I'm super aware of. I'm sure they're somewhere in my subconscious and will haunt me, and I'll have to pray about them. But I am very much in the season of children and household making, trying to be a domestic human being, and that's where my ambitions lie now. And to write, I'd like to become a good writer.
Yeah.
Maybe just selfishly. Uh, so I guess that's where some of that ambition is, and everything else I'm in maintenance mode. I'm so grateful for my life. I just want it to continue uh, as is. I used to feel like I was up in a tower looking for other lands to conquer, and now I feel like I'm in a tower just thanking God for whatever little bit of land I have, and trying
Yeah.
to be a good steward of that.
Well, it's a terrible trope, but it's true that it's the old guy that says, don't wish the season you have now away too quickly because
Exactly.
once the kids grow up, it's the strangest thing with parenting that you so love these little people
Yeah.
and they go away, but they don't go away. It's a very strange thing
Yeah.
because those babies are inside those toddlers or inside those grade school kids or inside those high school kids or inside those young adults. And, my wife
And
and I
you're
will,
inside of them, and they're inside of you.
yes,
Weird way that you see show up. I'm sure 30 years later or something like that. But
yeah, oh yeah, they are astoundingly sharp mirrors.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and as they grow, it's like, especially if, again, if you can maintain your marriage and get through all those years and then something comes up and you just look at your spouse and you know that, yeah, what they just did, well, that one was on me.
totally, totally. We are experiencing that mostly on me, not on my wife. I wish they'd be a little more like her.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, thank you for this. If we ever get a chance to talk again, I want to pick your brain more about church because I really liked just near the end of our conversation, just thinking through that. I wrote a piece last year called a parish manifesto that was kind of like is for mere orthodoxy, and I did a podcast version of it that I put on my Substack so people could, like me, who don't read, could listen to it because it's a long piece. It's a good advertisement for people to not read it. But it's just really top of mind for me the last couple of years. And I know you're not talking directly about church all the time, but it's still cool to see you as a pastor in a church with a local congregation who is also doing ministry in other ways. And so, anyway, I just wanted to leave you with that I'm thinking about that through you and through listening to you as well.
Okay.
And I think it's a lot.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk again. I'm
Yeah,
if
love it.
if unless the Lord takes me, I mean that could happen too. But
Or me.
or you, it's just the way life is. It is the way life is. But no, this has been delightful, Ross, and truly delightful. And so
Same.
I am hopefully maybe we'll you never know. I one of the conference things, I mean, what I hope for from the conferences is that they are starting to pop up now in different parts of the country. I hear rumors of a southeast estuary.
That'd be
Um,
helpful.
and I don't know if I'm going to that one or not yet because I have limited number of times that I can actually be away from Livingstones. But yeah, hopefully part of the reason of doing conferences is that it's obviously cool to talk on Zoom, but
Yeah.
it's actually really fun to have people get in a room and then using the estuary protocol, not just have people on stage talking, but then have everybody down in the tidal pools
Yes.
chewing on the stuff that's flowing through. So
Yes. I need to make, as long as it's not in June, July, and August, I need to be, that's when I'm full fledged doing surf camp. But in the other months, I need to be, um, more adventurous and get out to one of those things. There's a number of, you've got some big fans in my community that either have been or would want me to go with them. And so,
oh, awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. Well, and
they'll be excited that we talked.
if you do start an estuary, you can also decide to plan your own conference. And
There's actually a guy in our community who has started the beginnings of an estuary. At least he's using the estuary protocol. I don't know
okay.
if it's official or if there is an officiality to it.
Well, there is an
But
ELSNet. There is, if you go to estuaryhub.org, there is an estuary training leader program that John Van Donk runs. And so, yeah, there is a network that obviously anybody can do it, but there is a network
yeah,
that it's nice to get plugged into and then get some practice of it and then off you go. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how connected he is. Jimmy Sykes is his name, but um, he's really taken a lot of notes from you and is doing good things here in our community. So
wonderful.
yeah, well, thanks.
Well,
It's been great.
you're a Christian, so we can pray. I mean,
I love
I
that.
don't always
I love
ask
that.
or offer to pray because, not everybody's a Christian. And when
Yeah.
I was delivering lumber in New Jersey when I was in college, I was out on a long run with another driver because we had a truck to unload. And we stopped at a fast food place, and I just, of course, instinctively bowed my head and was praying silently before my lunch. What are you doing? Says I'm praying, and he's like, "Well, don't do it again." Okay,
Oh my gosh.
well, go ahead. I'll pray for you, and then you can pray for me, and that's how we'll close.
Okay. Yeah.
Lord, I thank you so much for Ross, and just a just a beautiful story, and Lord, the way that you've called him, and you've worked with him, and you've worked through him, and you've created something very unique. And Lord, I can see the glory in it. I can see you in it. I can see how you've used him and his wife to have a surf camp and have that surf camp be about surfing, but also people find you through it because they see him and they see his wife and they see the others in the community. And so, Lord, I thank you and praise you for that. And Lord, I'm sure that there are many, many such strange things that neither of us have ever heard of all over the world, where your servants are doing exactly what you told us to do in the first chapter of Acts, to be your witnesses. And maybe we're doing that under a steeple and in a church with stained glass, or maybe we're doing that by the Atlantic Ocean, or maybe we're just doing that in a strange, dirty place in some forgotten hole of the world someplace. But Lord, um, you love this world, and you love this world so much you gave your son. And Lord, bit by bit, we learn to trust him despite all of our fears and all of our pains and all of the bad things that happen. So I pray, Lord, that you would be with with Ross and his wife and his children and his camp and his Substack and all these projects that he's got going. I pray, Lord, that you bring the good things that you have and the hard things that you have to him, but at a good pace. That not that anything gets sort of disrupted or unbalanced by too much success or too much hardship, but that mixture, Lord, comes to him in such a way that he can continue to do that cruciform processing that all of us need to do, Lord, in the uniqueness and complexity of our lives. So be with him, bless his family, bless his work, and may your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So hear our prayer.
I thank you, Lord. Just repeating those words in my head, bring the good things and the hard things at a good pace. What a beautiful prayer. Now, be bold enough to pray the same for Paul. Lord, I ask your blessing on him in the name of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, on his ministry, on his wife, on his kids, his family, on Living Stones, on all of the offshoots from that and from his work online, that your Spirit would be powerfully at work in it, and that the good and the hard, the easy and the hard, the things that seem like blessings and the things that seem like curses would all be blessings to him as he grows to love you more, and that his love for you would would become a love that others can share, that others can imitate, that others can participate in his church and beyond, Lord, that we might all love you more, because that is really what it means to be saved, is to finally love you as you love us. Uh, Thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Great to meet you, man.
Same.
I'm sure we'll talk again.
Sounds good.
So rack up those questions for me because
All right, I will.
I probably can't answer them, but that is something that I really I'm thinking about it constantly, and I really love to talk about because and I do see what you're doing is very much similar to what I'm doing, but you're
Yeah.
just doing it in a different way. So
Yeah.
super cool.
All
All
right.
right, take care.
Thanks again. Talk to you
Bye
later.
bye.